rug shop. That Mercury dealer, that's where that Bob Segrist built out of that building that's now red. You know, we're talking, you know, tear gas and arrests and beatings in that intersection. This was not limited to campus. It was not limited to State Street. And really, do me a favor, next time you drive through this intersection, think about that. And then, so if this is January and February and April and May, it really should come as no surprise once we get to August. This was a target all along. Everyone knew this was a target. You could pick up Kaleidoscope, you could pick up the Daily Cardinal, Army Math, Land Tenure, T16, Red Gym, these are all targets. Today, these would be under non-stop surveillance. There'd be cameras, there'd be stakeouts. But back then, for some reason, they were unprotected. Here's a Bruce Fritz photo. This is Carl Armstrong and his mother, Ruth. And in the middle, you see that image of a poster for the movie The War at Home by our friend Glenn Silber and Barry Alexander Brown, an Academy Award nominated documentary. The War at Home opened in Madison in 1979. And one of the people who saw it was an alderman named Gary Gates, who was a libertarian alderman who I regard as fairly conservative. And first of all, The War at Home is an astonishing documentary of this period in Madison. If you haven't seen it, it's been remastered in a 4K. It's a beautiful print. I urge you to see it. Glenn did an outstanding job, and it really is a great chronicle and capsule of that time period. But Gary Gates saw this movie, and he was so moved by it that he introduced a resolution at the City Council to urge the U.S. Parole Department, Parole Office, to grant Carl Armstrong parole. And there was a city council meeting that I covered in 1979 that Ruth Armstrong spoke at. That was one of the most moving government meetings it was the most moving government meetings I've ever been at. It was, people were just awestruck by the level of debate and discussion, and the council voted overwhelming to urge the U.S. Parole Office to grant Carl Armstrong parole, because he was the longest, he served longer than any of the others. He served longer than David Fine or his brother Dwight, and of course Leo's never been found, but everyone else was out. And it was a fascinating example of how this movie moves this alderman to do something that then moves the federal government to do something, and it happens, and Carl is released. It was quite a story. Now, the received wisdom is that the bombing destroyed, the bombing ended the movement. The bombing ended the movement. That ain't so. That is just not so. This is the first anniversary of Kent State, Cambodia. This is May 1971. One day we got 1,000 out there, next day we got 2,000, 24 arrests, 14 injured. Look at Bascom Hill. And the important thing here is skirmish at U dorms. Now we're getting the Southeast dorms involved. Once upon a time, the protests were Mifflin, and the dorms and Langdon Street. How the hell with you, buddy? We're American. You know, by 71, the dorms are actively involved in the protests. And, I mean, there's hand-to-hand combat in the dorms. There's tear gas in dorms. Oh, there's also tear gas in Hillel. There's tear gas in Memorial Union. There's tear gas in the Mifflin Street Co-op. Because, well, you know, there's tear gas at the Lake Street station. Because when the cops see a big Red Cross where there's a medical tent, even though it's, you know, at a private residence or the Hillel Foundation, they throw tear gas in. When they see plywood in front of the Mifflin Co-op, they tear the plywood down and they throw CS canisters in. This is the Madison Police Department of 1970-71. We'll get to the police department changes in a moment. Now, there is so much protest going on that there are even riots about whether or not to make State Street a mall. This is 3,000 people having a riot on State Street because Mayor Dyke ended the test. They blocked off the last 2 blocks of State Street, the 700 and 800 blocks, to see if Madison, the bus system could handle it, to see what life was like. And so, okay, and they said, okay, test's over. We're going to bring the cars back. And the kids said, no, you're not. You're just not. And thousands of people, again, smashing on State Street. 24 arrests, and this goes on for 3 or 4 days, and the next night, the council goes, okay, we're going to have them all. We're tired of this. Yes, we'll have them all. Now, everyone gives Paul Soglin credit for the State Street Mall, and I give Paul Soglin most of the credit, but Dennis McGilligan is one of the real fathers of the State Street Mall. Dennis McGilligan was an alderman from downtown, from the Bloody Fourth. He was on from 70 to 74, and then he quit to become a mediator arbitrator with Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. And 15 years later, when I represented the same district on the county board, I quit to become a mediator with Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. There's a pattern there, I don't know what it is. But Dennis was the one who really gets credit for being part of the State Street Mall founders. So this is 1971, and if you can read it, the sign says no pedestrian crossing. The word pedestrian is crossed out, and the word pigs is written in. So just want to make sure. And for those of you of a certain vintage, you'll recognize the old KK in its original proper location. So this is 71, 1972, 10,000 people. Now, you might have thought that just having another anniversary of Kent State would be good enough to get people up and marching. Yeah, but then Richard Nixon goes and mines Haiphong Harbor. 10,000 people. This is the largest demonstration since the moratorium in October 1969. So anybody who tells you that the bombing killed the movement in Madison does not know whereof they speak. It knocked the wind out of people for a semester. It shattered some people's sense of invincibility and sense of moral self-righteousness, but it did not end the movement. Because the war did not end until, well, the war ends. Now, this is great. The war ends on April 29th, 1975. Bonnie Raitt is doing a concert at what was then the Capital City Theater, because it was in that interregnum between the Capitol Theater closing and the Civic Center getting built. I think my friend Andy Bohm was actually managing it at the time, or maybe Rob Corbett, because they fired Andy because he was, anyway. Bonnie Raitt makes the announcement from the stage of the Capital City Theater that Saigon has fallen and the war is over. Can you imagine a more electrifying moment to be 22 years old in Madison than to be at a Bonnie Raitt and Mose Allison concert and hear that announcement? And then they march up to the city council and put a banner of Ho Chi Minh behind the podium. You can tell Paul is not terribly impressed. That's Neil Koffler, who was another county supervisor. Yeah, so that's the way the war ends. And just to show that there were no hard feelings, after the war ended, somebody got the bright idea to rename Bassett Street Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was actually a Phil Ball idea that he sort of just tossed off, but somebody actually introduced a resolution. They brought it to the city council. It was voted on. It lost. But you'll see, they actually went out and made, that's a real green, they went out and fabricated signs that said Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they put them up. We did have some sense of humor back in the day. Okay, I have now talked for 45 minutes, and I'm only through the first segment. See, I haven't done this in a while, so here are your choices. I've got a segment on the police department and the undercover affinity files. I've got a bit about Bill Dyke and Paul Soglin and their records. I've got a bit about the commercial sex industry, and I've just got some one-off stuff. Or we could open it up to the crowd.
Keep going.
Okay, show of hands. Who wants to hear about the police department and the affinity squad? Okay. Who wants to hear about Bill Dyke? Okay. Who wants to hear about the Soglin record? Okay. Who wants to hear about commercial sex industry? You know, actually, the police department and let me yeah. I know what I'm going to do. I can move through. We'll get to sex because the sex stuff is really good. Okay, so David Cooper. David Cooper was not hired by Paul Soglin or Paul Soglin's Police and Fire Commission. David Cooper was hired by the Police and Fire Commission, appointed by Bill Dyke. This blows people's minds. And it was because the head of the police union, whose name I'm suddenly, God, why am I, geez, it'll come to me. Wants an outsider because he doesn't trust any of the two candidates. They hire Cooper. Bill Dyke doesn't even go to the police chief's swearing in. Police chief is voted in on a 3-2 vote, and the mayor doesn't come to his swearing in. That's a bad start. That bearded man with the sort of beady eyes with the microphone, that's our own David Marinus, who before became a Pulitzer Prize winning author and reporter for the Washington Post, was a radio reporter for WIBA. So David Cooper does a lot of things early on. He says you can't fire warning shots. He gets rid of the affinity squad. He grows he comes in with a mustache. He makes some promotions that the old line doesn't like. This guy on the left is Herman Thomas, the #2 guy. He's the acting chief after the old chief retires for health-related reasons. The day after Paul Soglin is elected, he takes the affinity squad files, which are the undercover reports, home, so that Paul Soglin can't get them. The chief finds out, bring him back, he brings him back, chief reassigns him to administrative duty, he quits. A bunch of people file charges, so now we have, So now we have a complaint against, a signed complaint against David Cooper. These hearings go on for more than a year. Well, David Cooper is at the risk of losing his job. The two guys on the left are Paul Soglin, appointees to the Police and Fire Commission. This is how radical Paul Soglin was at this time. The man on the left is Professor James Jones, the law professor, the first black member of the Police and Fire Commission. The man on the right is Attorney Andy Summers, who was a Bill Dyke appointee. The NAACP and the Equal Opportunities Commission and all the civil rights groups were pleading with Bill Dyke to appoint a minority in 1970, 71 to the Police and Fire Commission. Dyke appoints a white prosecutor. The man in the middle is a Paul Soglin appointee. He's Attorney Mel Greenberg. At the time that Paul Soglin appointed him to the Police and Fire Commission, he was Carl Armstrong's defense attorney. Is there a bigger to the police department than appointing Carl Armstrong's defense attorney? The Affinity Squad. This is George Kroll, Detective George Kroll. The poster in the middle says, wanted, dead or alive. The word alive is crossed out. This is from Takeover. George Kroll was the head of the Affinity Squad. He had both. They had agents that were running in the crowds who were then fingering people for later arrest, who were dressed in like protesters, dressed in jeans and army jackets. But they also had people infiltrating. Now, I spent an hour and a half on the phone with George Kroll the other day. He lied to me a number of times. But one thing he said that was really interesting that I believe is true is these two clippings in the middle are contemporaneous accounts from 1972 and 74 that said that Kroll was on the SDS steering committee at the time of Dow. Now, if that's true, that would be, whoa, that would make your head explode. If there was an undercover cop involved in planning the Dow demonstration that turned into the most important demonstration in Madison's history, that would be important news. So as a historian, it's like, damn, this is... So I'm talking to George, and George goes, no, I hadn't even graduated from the academy in 1967. I went to just see what was happening, but I wasn't... But then I find this report from 1969 in the affinity squads, there was an undercover cop on the SDS steering committee. Get your heads around that. There was a Madison Police Department undercover cop on the SDS steering committee. One of the cops, I think it was Dirac, reported that in 1971 that the anti-war movement is strong, if not stronger than ever. So we've even got cops saying, yeah, the bombing didn't kill the movement, it's stronger. The image on the right, all those blacked out spaces, those are addresses and phone numbers of protesters. That's how close the police got to people, that they knew when they were leaving town. They had their phone numbers. They had their addresses. This is Alderman Paul Soglin in April 1972. The picture he's holding up is of an undercover cop. In 1972, Paul Soglin gets, they have the budget, and they've got the number of police officers. And he says, okay, 272 police officers. And then he goes and he counts all the photographs on the wall, and there are only 260. And he goes, wait a minute, there are 12 people not accounted for. I bet those are the undercover cops. They're all local, so he goes to all the area high schools, and he gets the yearbooks, and they comb the yearbooks, and they get the photographs. In April 1973, the city of Madison elected as its mayor a man who 14 months earlier had released photographs of all the undercover cops. This still blows Paul's mind. Now the picture on the right, Jerry Rubin and Julie Maynard, high on LSD I talked to Madison today, he confirmed that. Because Madison was on the other side of the tree. So this is Jerry Rubin and Julie Maynard tripping on acid at the Marijuana Smoke-In in April 1972. Julie Maynard was Julie Maynard never was paid by the Madison Police Department, but was a great informant. She was so deep into the movement because she came from the movement. She was a protester who got turned off after Sterling Hall, after Army Math, and she starts volunteering her services to George Kroll. She is so tight in the movement. When they go to Miami for the Republican convention, Julie Maynard is answering phones for Jerry and Abby Hoffman. She's in meetings at the People's Office with defense attorneys and their clients. She's driving to New York to try and ensnare John Lennon in a plot to cross state lines to commit conspiracy. George Kroll says that she's even gone to China to file reports for the CIA. Now, does Julie Maynard get this tight with the movement because the police department and Julie Maynard are so clever, or because the movement is just so high that it's not paying attention and it's letting people like Julie Maynard into the offices? Probably both. Just one more thing about, so not only do we elect as a mayor a guy who's releasing undercover photographs, the Police and Fire Commission that mayor appointed hires as its fire chief a man who 10 years earlier had led the fire department out on an illegal strike. Now, there are many cities in America where if you break the law and lead the fire department out on an illegal strike, you will probably not be chosen as the next fire chief. Madison is not one of those cities. And what is one of the first things Ed Durkin does? He hires Eugene Parks as his administrative assistant. I could do a whole seminar on Eugene Parks. And the importance of leadership. 1978, we finally get the first recruit class with women in the fire department. And they all fail. And Soglin wants to see the videos of the test to see, because the union is part of the, Charlie Merkel and the union who do not want women in the fire department because their wives don't want women in the fire department. The union has the ability to flunk people out of the training program. So they flunk all the women out, and Soglin wants to see, was the test legitimate? And he sees the videotape, and the women aren't lifting the ladders properly, and they're not controlling the hoses. So, okay, the test was legitimate, and he approves they're fired. Ed Durkin gets chosen chief, and they look at and they find out that the test was fraudulent, that they gave the women the old wooden ladders, they gave the men the light new aluminum ladders. And of course the men's fathers and uncles and brothers had all been in the fire department, so they knew how to raise ladders. The women never had any training. They give the women the hoses that are uncontrollable because the pressure's turned up too high. So with a new fire chief, they have a new test, and in 1980, Judith Peterson, who by then was the president of the Police and Fire Commission, presides at the graduation of the class with future Lieutenant Mary Freitag and Division Chief Marcia Holtz. Because a new fire chief, Ed Durkin, came in and did the right thing because a new Police and Fire Commission hired the right fire chief. That is why mayors matter, that is why appointments matter, that is why leadership matters. Very briefly, Bill Dyke. You can see all the red X's. Those are things he didn't get done. The only two things Bill Dyke got done, and this will come as a surprise, he created the Landmarks Commission. In the aftermath of Mapleside being destroyed for a Burger King, or a Burger Chef, whatever it was, in 1970, Bill Dyke creates the Landmarks Commission, which I had the honor of serving on for a number of years, as did Bill, until we both fell afoul of, but we didn't go there. And one of the great things they saved, of course, was the Gates of Heaven. Now, the photo on the left, that's the square in 1970. That orange arrow is Gates of Heaven. Next to it is the Sinclair gas station. Think about the use of land in 1970, that we had a gas station and a 100-year-old clinic, it was now a veterinarian's clinic, a block off the square. And then, of course, thanks to David and Lois Stoller, who's Norton and Lois Stoller, who's David Stoller's parents, the Gates of Heaven were saved. The reason Bill Dyke got nothing done was because of guys like this. Here's Joe Thomas, Paul Soglin, Dennis McGilligan, Susan K. Phillips, Eugene Parks, some of the radical contingent that the balance was that Dyke couldn't get anything he wanted done, but he had the veto to stop anything that they wanted done, so nothing got done. 1973, the most famous quote in Madison mayoral politics. Bill Dyke refused to debate anyone during the primary. He refused to debate Paul. He agreed to debate Paul one time at West High School. In his closing remarks, I have enough faith in the decent people of the city that they will make the right choice. If was anybody here there? Because and people gasp. They go, did he say that? Did he really say that? And yet he did. What's interesting is he made that same quote was in a newspaper article a week before. It got no traction because hearing something, seeing somebody say something, today it would be a viral moment, but hearing it as opposed to just reading it has so much more impact, and everyone could perceive it collectively, that it really, I don't think it turned the election, but it made Paul's margin much greater, and it will live forever. Oh, the bearded man, not the bearded, the man with the mustache sitting next to Bill Dyke, some of you may remember Andy Blum. That is future Department of Administration head Andy Blum, who at this time was president of the Regent Neighborhood Association, where this was held. Takeover celebrating Paul's election with a Lenin wearing a Soglin button. And you see what, up at the top where it says Jackie Onassis nude? Yeah, they published the full frontal nudity photos of Jackie Onassis. The reason I cannot show the first issue of Takeover is that it is pornographic. It is pornographic. And so, very briefly, to go through, this is Paul's record in just his first 6 years. All those green checks are things he got done. The red crosses are things he did not. These are the things he got done in 6 years. Build the Civic Center, build the State Street Mall, build a Capitol Center, retain AAA bond ratings, childcare, community services, complete the Triangle, ban the sale of handguns. We ban the sale of handguns in the city of Madison. A police policy review board, a transportation commission, police advisory commission. The way he changed the composition of citizen commissions. Bill Dyke appointed, 19% of Bill Dyke's appointees were women. 47% of Paul Soglin's appointees were women. The single largest age cohort for Paul Soglin were people in his 20s. Not only did he put Carl Armstrong's defense attorney on the Police and Fire Commission, he put Lester Pines on the Plan Commission. He put the head of SDS to head the Board of Public Works. He put women, he put minorities, he put young people. He changed the physical face of Madison, he changed the infrastructure of Madison, and everything, it all happened in concert. And that fundamental change in who it was who was sitting at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the people that Paul Soglin put at the table have stayed at the table. Now, some of us stayed at the table too long, and we were asked to leave. But you get my point. I mean, there were it created a new reality for what Madison government would be. Created the Community Development Authority, created the Madison Development Corporation, bought the post office, rubberized. If anyone's been here a long time, remember the railroad tracks on West Washington? He rubberized them. I mean, to say that it was a revolution is an understatement. We are today living with the Madison that Paul Soglin created in those 6 years. And he did not do it alone. Jim Rowan and Phil Ball. And the picture of Jim Rowan and Paul Soglin, they're hatching something. It's like, they got the ordinance book out in front of them. It's like, hey, how about this? Yeah, we could do that. And they did it. And Jim Rowan was a radical journalist for the Daily Cardinal. Jim Rowan wrote the articles that made Army Math a target. Jim Rowan was the one who exposed all the secret defense work that Army Math was doing. Jim Rowan was Paul Soglin's chief of staff. Phil Ball was his committee coordinator. And given that Paul Soglin has this reputation of radicalism, they were hired to protect his left flank, because the left was suspicious of anyone who'd go into electoral politics. You were, by definition, a sellout. So Paul hires these two radicals to protect his left flank, and they did a fine job. Phil Ball passed away about a year or so ago. A very interesting guy, Navy veteran, served in Vietnam, created the Madison Tenant Union, tried mightily to keep MATC downtown, wasn't able to do so. Jim Rowan would eventually run for mayor after Paul, but due to the newspaper strike, the Cap Times endorsed Joel Skornica, and he lost by 1,018 votes. The fact that he lost by the same number of votes as were Pink Flamingos, I don't know if that was happenstance. I don't know if Leon actually thought about that. I'll have to ask Jim Mallon that someday. Paul's next election, Henry Reynolds. Henry Reynolds was the most successful mayor of the 1960s. Built parking ramps, built the Monona Causeway, built the library, built public housing, was brought back in 1975 because of massage parlors and nude dancing, and Paul just cleaned his clock, 2-1. And what does Paul do 2 months or 3 months after he gets elected? He goes and hangs out with Fidel. Yeah. He spent like hours talking with Fidel, and Ted O'Connell and goes down there with a Channel 3 news crew. They forget to put film in the camera. Oh. So the only record are these photos which we think Jim Rowan took, because one of them shows Susan McGovern in the background. But and then the next election, Nino Amato. There's no connection between the Amato family and organized crime. I repeat, there's no connection between the Amato family and organized crime. But Takeover thought, well, so they. And the newspapers don't pick up these stories until Nino has a press conference to denounce the stories, at which point the newspapers pick up the stories. You can tell by Paul's attitude, he's not really happy that this is going on. Nino ran as a conservative. He's become a much more liberal, equal opportunities guy. I'm on the Board of Historic Madison with him. But this was another pretty convincing sweep by Paul. Okay. Due to popular demand. This is the state. In the 1960s, some of you may remember, we had free love. In the 1970s, you had to pay for it. This is the state of the commercial sex industry in Madison. That central image there, that is one page in one day's newspaper. We've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 3 massage parlors, a strip joint, 4 X-rated movies, and that's just one little segment. That the lead actress in the movie 14 and Under, she was 14 and under. She was 13 years old. There's even a movie about massage parlors. And of course the dangle. In one block off the square, you could go to the salad bar for a nice meal, or you could go to the Mustang bar, see a topless bartender. You could go to the dangle for some all-nude dancing. You could go to This Is Heaven or Sherry for a sexual massage, or you could just hang out at the Main King, which was Streetwalker Central. This was life in Madison in the late 70s. The dangle